All right, it is April 24th, 2024, and we are here to chat about what's next in Gutenberg. So this whole Hangout seeks to be basically like a snapshot of what's being worked on to both provide broader awareness to WordPress contributors and get feedback. The hope is that in kind of gathering before a beta period, we can talk about different features and flesh out concerns sooner. So this is something I think we learned from past releases of different features where there were things that I think a lot of us wish we'd gotten on similar pages before. And so even if you can't, if you're watching this later, recording later, there will be links all on the way for you to chime in and dive in. This is not meant to be the sole container where this will be discussed. This is meant to direct people, show people, build awareness, and then allow folks to dive in, whether it's on this call or later. And so that's the snapshot approach. So this will take the form, just so you have an understanding, and no one's sharing any screen right now. So if that's what I saw someone comment saying they can't see the host screen, no one's sharing anything just yet. But Rich and Saxon will be very shortly, and they will go through different demos, and we will do questions and discussion after. So if you have questions and things that you want to share, don't wait. Just feel free to share them in the chat. I'll write them all down, and we can follow up with them later. And if there are any that we don't get to, we can, of course, always follow up later in the post. But yeah, so demos first, and then we'll dive into questions and stuff later. This session is also going to be covering features slated for 6.6 or 6.7, depends. But it's very much stuff that's in progress. So you sometimes will see different high fidelity, low fidelity demos depending upon what's being shown. Another thing, as a reminder, this is set aside space for 90 minutes. We normally keep public hangouts, we try to about an hour. This is intentionally longer to have discussion and have space. And it's a bit of an experiment. I want to see how that time period feels. But this also means that we do not have set aside breaks. So I am going to trust everyone to jump in and out as they want, turn your camera on and off, basically come and go as you please. And we will not be moving past the 90-minute mark. I will cut whoever it is off. We will end there. I want to be really respectful of people's time. And the last thing, just to set a reminder and set the tone, this is supposed to be casual, collaborative, and fun. And so chime in, share your thoughts. Be mindful of how much space you take up too. We want to hear from lots of different people. But yeah, this is not a place where we're going to be making big decisions. It's instead going to be using the time to explore what's coming up, get feedback, dive into questions, all that good stuff. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand it over to, I'm pretty sure, Rich, you're kicking it off. And
Yeah.
let me make sure first that you actually can share your screen, because that would be helpful, wouldn't it? Sweet.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Anne, for setting this up. I think this is something that's much needed in our space, and I'm looking forward to doing more of these in the future, and with other folks too, and also in different time zones. All right, so everyone can see my screen here. All right, so the first thing I want to cover today is all about theme styles and variations. If you're not familiar with variations, they're essentially alternate versions of theme.json that you can ship with a theme. Historically, a theme can bundle a few variations so that when you pick a theme, you can start off with a couple different vibes right out of the gate. Of 2024 included 6 or 7 already. In 2023, kind of went far out and pushed it a little bit further by doing more interesting variations as well. But here I'm going to take a look at the variations that we have. I added a couple, and I'll show you why in a minute. But you can pick a different one, and it changes the vibe of your site. We have different ones here. Some of them are a bit more expressive, like this dark one. But the reason I'm showing this is because we've been exploring how to abstract color and typography independently from these style variations. So if you like the style of the type in this one variation here, but you like the colors provided in this one, then you can pull from those individually. And I'll show you how we do that here. We've got colors. Within the colors, if I change any of these colors here, you can notice the typography is staying the same, but all the colors are adapting based on those existing variations. And the same works for typography with these presets here. So I can change to a different set of typography styles, and those are all applied here. It's not just the fonts that are loaded, but also the font sizes, any declaration of style like letter spacing or casing as well. So that way you really can change the vibe of your site just with the typography or just with the colors using the existing pieces in here. One of the best part about this is that it works with all the existing themes already out there that do support variations like 2024 and 2023 and plenty of others, Frost included. And we're not introducing any new APIs or new technologies here. We're just filtering out the colors and just filtering out the typography styles from those existing variations. So we're not introducing any new concepts here. There's still a couple of things to iron out, especially around like the UI UX side of things. Like these might go within the palette view here. We might experiment with displaying colors in a different fashion so that they're less, perhaps less confusing to be intermixed with the full styles here. So there's some ideas centering around that, and we can point on GitHub to where a lot of the activity is happening on this front. But I'm really stoked about this effort. I know one of the big pieces of feedback received on 2024 was to be able to use just colors or just typography, and it's a pretty neat that we were able to pull this together. All right. Are there any immediate questions in the chat? Yeah, you can ask questions in the chat, and we will pull them up as we're talking about pieces or refer back to them as well.
Yeah, just drop them in the chat for sure. Either way.
All right, so I'll move on to the second part of styles here. So the other big piece on the style front is block style variations. I'm kind of referring to these as section styles. It's again, we're not inventing anything new. We're not providing any new pieces to here, but we're just kind of modifying the existing functionality of block styles. If you're not familiar with block styles, it's these styles here that are applied to any block that you can register them via PHP. You can also register now with theme.json. And so what we did was, and this is a PR that's still in the works, and it's in the process of getting kind of broken up into manageable pieces and pushed into Gutenberg. But what we did is made it so that you can apply a set of styles to each of these style variations here. And when you apply them, they're going to show up over the entire style up all the blocks within this one group block. So let me go back to here, pick a style. And I'm going to change it here. And you can see that these styles are colors that I pulled from the WordPress.org website. They're defined in theme.json. So if we take a look here, they're just block variations. And the one new advantage here is that I can also assign this one variation to multiple blocks at a time. So I can, for this demo here, I set it up for the group block, the columns block, and the column block, because I wanted to have everything that could be a section, like a section of content, so I could style all the elements within it as well. And I'm using the same exact format as any other theme.json styling, where I'm setting the element style at the top level. I've also done a little bit of fancy stuff here within the paragraph block, showing that you can use reference values, even reference values directly from the variation. So this is finding the light value text color and using this value here. So we don't have to update it in two spots, and styling elements like links, button, hover states as well. Now in the future, maybe in this next release, but probably sometime this year, you'll be able to probably edit these in theme.json or outside of theme.json into the global styles interface, like you can with the button outline, for example. It'd be nice to be able to, even in style book, be able to pull up all the different styles that you have within these variations so that you can see them all at one point. I also think it's interesting that from a builder perspective or for like an agency perspective, you can formulate these styles that can be applied with one click right here at the top. So if you learn, like, this is what I use to style, like you're kind of getting out from the granularity of all the individual settings down here for colors and heading styles and button hovers and anything. So it's really kind of pulling a lot of those complexities out. And I'm going to show another cool bit here. I'm going to go through and style a couple of these sections here. Let's see, let's use this one, and then maybe down here we'll use the darkest one. I'm going to go to the color presets that I showed you earlier. Engage zoom out so we can see a little bit better. and show you how it also adapts via each of the variations of a theme. So as I switch through these variations, these colors are actually going to switch as well. And not every theme is going to have the same number of variations, right? Like there's some themes that are more minimal naturally, so you're not going to have, three. In this example, I have three different options for the variations. So if you don't have anything for that one particular style, like this one here, I made this a little bit more minimal. It just supports a light and a dark one. So the one in the middle that was more of a middle ground, it just doesn't happen. It's fine because this theme is meant and designed to be more minimal and just more of a classic vibe. But it can go wild too. Like you can have this particular preset has this really bright color here and this really bright one here, and then the dark one is just all the way black. Of course, you want to abide by color contrast rules and whatnot, but this is just to kind of show like what you can do and how much variation we can put just within a few theme.json declarations there. Another benefit I see of this is like if themes are going to provide variations, and in essence, builders of the themes or even agencies creating themes for their clients, any patterns that we also build can have these same classes. So if I have any pattern throughout my theme with this particular class that this one style variation uses, which is light, so it's style light, then that class will style those contents regardless of where, if it's in the pattern directory on WordPress.org, or if you're looking at patterns on your own site here. So it does provide a way to add much more variance, even in the standard pieces of building out of the box. Sweet. How are we feeling about styles?
We have one question that I think we can pretty quickly answer related to this from Colin. For light, dark, and the block styles demo, how are these configured differently than a block style or block variation? And I dropped a link to the PR that's in progress, basically extending the block style variation work to allow for this to use the same mechanism. So you were spot on to call that out. We're trying to reuse that current thing to power this. I don't know, Rich or Sexton, if you want to expand on that, but.
Yes, it's leveraging block style variations, but it's providing a method for styling all the child blocks within it. So not just the individual block that you apply the style to, and it's also allowing you to do multiple blocks. So this is doing all the group blocks, all the column blocks, and single column blocks as well. And you could do any block that you would like, and then you can nest the styles. So if you have a group block within a group block, you can apply a different color or a different section style to that inner block, and it would show up as it's supposed to with that color applied. And then with all of those combinations, you can still go in and change the background color, change the button color if you'd like on all of these. So like having that hierarchy of style was important to really clarify and clean up. So a lot of that work needed to happen for something like this, which seems, on the surface, it seems quite simple, but behind the curtain, it took quite a bit of effort to make sure that it would result in expected results.
Yeah, and you can do all that through the theme.json file now as well, which wasn't possible before.
Yeah, it's great because now any theme can decide what these variations look like, so it doesn't even matter anymore what the color slugs are that a theme uses. Like it doesn't matter because in previous themes, base and contrast were the primary colors, the color slugs that we used, and when you use base and contrast, that those two are going to be appropriately contrasting values as a designer, like you're going to build the theme that way, but any other color combinations you can't guarantee. So what this allows the theme to do is say, like, here are the different combinations of color. It doesn't matter what the slugs are. All that matters is what this particular variation is deciding needs to happen. And then the theme styles that variation rather than we're trying to guess and match up different slugs and contrast ratios. Yes, I can share this theme.json file where we do have this up. Right now, I just plugged it into 2024 just to show like what it looks like and feels like here. And it's actually interesting. Another side quest that this effort has kind of unlocked is making theme.json just quite a little bit more portable across themes. So this JSON file I have here is not even 2024 at all. It's another thing that I just experimented with, and is styling 2024 like it should, which is really interesting to see how you can now potentially mix and match theme.json files without and combined with these section styles without losing the creative nature of styling content and making sure that there's different pieces of content with different styles if the theme wants it to have that.
I want to be mindful of just going through the demos first and looking back on questions. So let's keep moving, but I'm capturing these. So all these are in a doc and I'm going to go through and make sure we go through all these. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Sweet.
All right. So let me go back to my default style here. All right, so those are the style fronts. The third big piece on my front is the zoom out. So you might have seen I engaged this control here to zoom out the page just to see things from a bird's eye view. But this control here is likely not going to remain where it is now. There's some experiments about putting it here within this panel here, or perhaps it's just auto-engaged based on the context of what you're doing. There's still quite a bit of flux on that front, but the idea of being able to see and edit your site from, again, from like a less granular perspective, I think is important. And some of the ways that we've surfaced this is within the patterns inserter, for example. So if I go here, I hit patterns and open the about patterns, I can see now that the page here on the canvas on the right has zoomed out. And now I'm not covering up my content with the patterns. I could see everything all at once, and I'm kind of abstracted because I'm putting in big chunks at a time. I'm not putting in individual blocks at a time on the page. So from this perspective, you could drag one in. You could potentially, there's a few quirks here that we're still ironing out, but I have to disengage zoom out in order to move things from that point of view. But you can move things around up and down. There's this notion of shuffling. So shuffling is based on the context of the category that you inserted a pattern in. So this pattern was inserted from the about category. So it will shuffle to other about patterns. And which is kind of interesting. I think in the future would be really cool if we mapped, if you edit this pattern, if I mapped these values like the content for the heading and the paragraphs, images, even maybe buttons, like I think there's something to explore there about shuffling different layouts without losing edited content. So if this pattern, it's dirty, if we manipulated it, because then it'd be interesting to say like, I want a different layout, but I don't want to have to rebuild what I already have. So that's kind of the future looking perspective of this idea of shuffling. I also think it'd be cool to surface the section styles through those, what I just shared earlier, in here somehow, so that you could also perhaps toggle through a couple of these or just pick one from a list and apply styling to whole patterns at a time from this perspective. And you can also delete now, and it's easier to select these one at a time. There's some tiny optimizations that are sequenced in a way to like see and experiment if this is something viable, and if so, like how do we introduce this in a way that either you control and you say yes, I want to be zoomed out or not, or we introduce it and invoke it in areas like global styles, for example, or for inserting patterns. But I think it's really interesting this perspective here.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be key when it is invoked that it's very context relevant. Like I could see it being pretty jarring if it came out when it was not expected, and having a way to get out of that mode, I think is definitely desired. Like I don't always want to build with patterns, but having the ability to switch between the two, I think is cool.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's a good way to surface patterns. Sorry.
Exciting to see how this ties into the add new page flow as well, and even just onboarding experiences. I think can really help people onboard into WordPress.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good key point, because right now in the post editor we have that add new page modal with the starter content that a theme can provide X number of patterns for, and they're all whole pages that are designed in, and we know it's probably not the ideal solution. It's nice that a theme can provide some of those, and I think that that's important. But I do think if a theme is providing individual patterns or site has its own patterns, then you should be able to create a new page and start building immediately with those if you want to. And I think that we need to, I see this potentially as an evolution of that initial modal view right now, and into where you can create or draft pages right off with patterns if you want to, or have a way to say like, no, that's not my vibe. Sweet. Are there any pressing questions on this
I think
Right.
quick questions. By zooming out, this is from Brian, by zooming out for the pattern view, does that mean that patterns aren't so useful for smaller groups of blocks? For example, wanting to add a call to action pattern to a column.
Yeah, I think that,
Mhm.
yeah, you can go ahead. Yeah, if you
I
want.
mean, I think they're still useful. I think it's just different
Yeah.
context. It's allowing you to engage with patterns in a different way that we haven't had before. So yeah, I definitely think patterns are so useful for smaller groups of blocks, and we'll still see that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and the way that this is essentially working, this is identifying top level blocks. So it's not saying that it has to be like a full width block or it has to be a specific type of pattern or anything. It's just identifying these top level blocks. And I think we're going to find scenarios where we need to optimize a little bit better, and especially like if you're trying to drill in and add a pattern to a specific piece within something that would be like a section of your site. But that's something worth really digging into a little bit further on.
Yeah, I agree. Another, I think one that will be relevant, I just don't want to, some of these we're making judgment calls on. Sorry, Brian Gardner. I'm missing the purpose of the shuffle button. What if it was a button that showed all relevant patterns to replace the current one with? I'm imagining something similar like the query loop block, which has that current experience. I think a lot of that has to probably do with the, like, that is something we need to figure out is these different experiences and flows, right? Like we have different ways of replacing functionality, like template parts now show patterns when you're in the inspector and you can see all the different, footer options you can replace it with. And shuffling is another way of surfacing the same thing. So I don't know where we'll land on that. I'm curious, Richard Saxon, what you think of it, but I think you bring up a good point that there's all these different ways, like query loop block, setup functionality where you're selecting from patterns, add new page, or again, selecting from patterns that we need to kind of unify with this.
Yeah, I think it's an exploration, is to see like if this is something viable, and it might not be where, or right now shuffling is technically just going to the next pattern. It used to just find a random pattern, but that just kind of resulted in kind of oddities. So this is essentially just going through the list of patterns to show you more about patterns or more team patterns or whatnot. I think it could be interesting to have like more of a carousel type behavior, perhaps, like if you wanted to go to the next one, or no, I want to go back to the one I just had. Like we could lean into that, and especially as this potentially evolves into the idea I mentioned about like content mapping as well. It really does. I think that becomes like the like, okay, yeah, this is cool. But to get there, we have to like kind of iron out like some of these other pieces to the stepping stones to get there.
There's also the new footer experience and like template part experience where if you select a footer, you can do something similar where you're just replacing it in the inspector.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Right here.
Yeah. No, I just like how visual it is. Like I think the shuffle thing, what I find cool is that you can switch between them. But the thing that I like about the template part thing is you can see all of them. So you're not just sitting there clicking buttons. So I'm curious where we land with this for sure. It's also the previews are so small. There's performance considerations. There's like a lot of stuff that goes into it.
Yep. Sweet. So those are the three pieces that I really wanted to highlight today. But the theme style variations leveled up to creating these color and typography presets, the block style variations with these section styles that we can build for these like groups and columns and whatnot, and then also the zoom out mode, which is all of these are they're still in flight for sure, and some of them are closer to landing than others, but all of them I think do have a big impact on the editing experience. Sweet.
Thank you, Rich. It was awesome. It's exciting to see this stuff move from designs and GitHub issues to something you can feel and play with. Saxon, gonna hand it over to you.
Cool. So I have quite a few things to get through, and a lot of them are kind of not related. So I'll be jumping around a little bit. I've merged everything into a local brand, so I can just quickly zoom through it. But if things go wrong, this is a live demo, so apologies, but we can still talk through them. The first thing I want to touch on for 6.6 is that we're continuing to evolve data views. So if you haven't played around with data views or heard of the concept of data views, they're basically just index pages right now, currently within the site editor, but they're helping to inform the direction of admin in future. So for 6.6, what we're doing is a few things. First is that we're introducing a new layout type. So a layout is essentially a way that you can display various post types in a table. And the new layout type they're introducing is called a list, which is basically a side-by-side view. It's ideal for very quickly previewing different post types that may be a bit more visual. So pages is a good example of that, and posts if you want to review content fairly quickly without jumping into the editor and back out again. We still have all of the same capabilities in list view, they're just in a bit more condensed manner. Just keep in mind this is currently on a branch, and it's still a work in progress, so we want to refine like how this responds to different viewports and whatnot. But you can still apply filters. The second thing, which is experimental right now, is this idea of views. So you'll notice that we're in pages right now. We have this top level navigation, which is currently all pages, drafts, and trash. These are essentially default views, and a view is basically just a saved set of filters and layout types, and basically the view configuration. Very similar to other more sort of data heavy tools like Notion and Airtable if you've used them. This is very much beneficial to, let's say, like the enterprise use cases that have teams of hundreds and very specific workflows. And so what this will allow me to do is I can actually create my own custom views as well. So let's say if I want to create a view that's specifically for me, I can create my pages view and then filter it by author and then admin. That's my user account. And now I basically have a view that filters down my posts that I'm aware of. This is a bit of a bug that we have to sort through, but it also reflects the layout type as well. And so this is not just for pages. This also is for every other post type that we have in the site editor. You can see patterns here, which are a bit more visual. So grid is the default layout type for patterns, templates as well. This simplifies things. So we currently have, if you are aware of the current state of things, we have this manage button at the bottom for different post types, and that basically takes you into the data views, and this is kind of consolidating it. So we're kind of unifying those experiences. For patterns, the goal is to eventually treat template parts and patterns. This is kind of separate but still connected, treat them in a similar sort of way. So template parts are really very much similar to synced patterns. If you think about it, it's just that we have a greater understanding of template parts and they can be hooked into. So the goal is to kind of consolidate that as well and treat template parts as almost like special categories, pattern categories. The vision of this, so this is really just the start, and it's a continual evolution, showcases where admin might be going. The vision is to eventually, if I click into one of these pages, I'll switch to grid, for example, and click in and venture out again. We have this sort of middle ground right now. And so the goal, and we call this the detail page, but really this is a space for post types to include any sort of data or maybe more structured inputs. But for core, like for default post types like posts and pages, a lot of this is actually replicated or duplicated in the inspector. So this is the inspector in the editor. And so a tangential piece of work here is actually updating the inspector to cover what's in the detail pages, which it's you can see we have featured images here and title and some of the other metadata. So we're really just closing the gap, and once that gap has been closed, this is the tracking issue if you're interested. But once that gap has been closed, this middle step here for posts and pages and patterns and templates, that'll go away. And so basically you'll be able to jump straight into the editor and then back out again to the list view. Whereas right now you kind of jumped into this middle step, which can be quite jarring. So that's the vision. And it doesn't necessarily mean that middle step will go away for everything. If you've been keeping track of some of the admin work, the vision is actually, if we treat this space here, we call it like as the content frame, which is where the primary content goes in the admin experience. There will be post types, like in this case, products, for example, that where the majority of editing will actually be done in more of an admin-based interface. There are certain things in a product that may not be presented in the front end, But in the case of a product, you still have the front end representation of a product. So it's still valuable in the sense that you might want to style various things in the editor with a product, but from a back-end perspective, most of that will still be happening in admin. And at that point, for post types like this, we will still be drilling down. It's just up to the post type to define whether the primary action will be jumping into the editor, like a post or a page, or drilling down in the content frame, like in the case of a product. If you think about like custom post types, and you may have various custom fields which are more organizational, this is probably a good space for that, as opposed to in the editor where it currently exists, and in the inspector, it's just a different variation of that. Any questions about that work? We can leave it to the end as well.
I'm not seeing any questions come in specific to this yet. I think everyone's probably just like amazed.
Yeah, so patterns is a good example where in patterns, even in grid view, you have the previews of the patterns. It's meant to be a far more visual experience, but still allow for things like bulk select, and if you're adding various fields to post types, it's more of a structured approach. So
I know one question that comes up related to this before we move on from data views is extensibility. Like I've seen that come up across the board. When can we start using this? And I did want to touch on this while we're talking about it. The APIs are still private, and that's because this work is ongoing, but it's meant to be eventually made public once things stabilize a bit more. So I wanted to bring that up. Folks can use these design components now if they want to, and then reuse the APIs when they're available. But I know that has come up a fair amount as folks wanting to get their hands on this or start exploring. I think there was a GitHub issue someone opened about it being broken, and they tried to extend it, and that's because all this stuff is still private intentionally. So just wanted to call that out if you're a plugin author and looking at this and want to start digging in. Colin also has a question too.
I'll just add to the accessibility quickly, is that the way that this is designed or architected is that it can be up to the consumer to decide how they want to use it, the data views component essentially. So in this case, we're in patterns, and patterns doesn't have a list view because the way the pattern consumes the component has just decided that maybe it's not as useful to use compared to like pages or posts. So the consumer of the component can decide how to define it, including like the default views that come with it. So you can create whatever default views you want, and then make it open the ability to create custom views as well.
Yeah, the custom views in particular are something that in the phase 3 conversations that I had talking about this conceptually was really exciting for folks. So I think it was cool that you called out that enterprise level use case. Colin asked, are we able to control where our custom post type appears in the sidebar order? I don't know if we're that far ahead yet. I think that's a little bit further afield.
The way the site editor is built right now is not necessarily built around an admin experience. Obviously, it's the site editor, so it was originally meant to be, it's architected to be an editor, but it gives us a space to explore some of these things. So what we are looking at, or beginning to look at, is just to improve how the routing works, for example, how page registration works. So when you're registering something in here, ideally you should be able to hook into or make use of the sidebar, the content frame, which is this middle section, and then the preview frame as well. And any sort of configuration you want. Maybe you're creating a post type, let's say like orders, for example, like product orders, that would not benefit from the preview frame. And in that case, you don't have to use it. It'll essentially be off screen. But in other cases, maybe you just want to use a sidebar in the preview frame, and that's fine too. So that's the goal, is to make this really customizable in future. And it kind of leans into the idea that a lot of the work around the new admin design is personalization, customization, being able to shape WordPress to whatever use case you need, and then through the use of blueprints, be able to share that out to the community for others to make use of as well.
Love it. Let's keep moving, just to be mindful of time, but I'm capturing Brian, your question as well.
I'll just, one more point is just to give an idea of where this is going. If you think about layout types, think about like Kanban as a layout type as well, because that kind of opens up workflow possibilities. So next up, I want to touch on pattern overrides, or synced pattern overrides. So synced patterns aren't new. They've been around for a while. Previously, they were reusable blocks consolidated into the idea of patterns, but we're introducing this ability to override blocks within an instance of the pattern. So here I've added synced pattern. If I click on edit original, now I'm in the isolated pattern view. So this is essentially if I create a new pattern, this is what I see. And I have my blocks here. And we've added the ability to mark blocks as overridable. So once a block is overridable, I can give it a name just to help people understand what the purpose of the block is. And then I'll set the image as well as overridable. So now that these are overridable, I can go back into my page. And I can see now that when I click on the pattern, the blocks that are overridable are highlighted. When I click, so if I try and click somewhere that isn't editable, the blocks that are overridable are highlighted. And now I can make any change to this block. And the same as the image block. For blocks that are a little bit more detailed than say the heading and the paragraph block and have more attributes that can be overridden. If you select the parent pattern, and just the parent pattern makes use of a concept called content only locking, which means basically you can edit the content, but you can't modify the structure. And in content only, we highlight the blocks that are editable. So in this case, because I have marked the paragraph of the description and the image as overridable, I can see them in my sidebar here. I can click them to select them on canvas and make any changes. For blocks that have other attributes, like the image block, something that we're working on is just improving the content only experience. So in this case, it drills down and I can see like alternative text, for example, is editable, and I can drill back up again. This is part of a broader piece of work, which is part of this issue here, which is actually revolves around the idea of simplifying the editing experience in the editor. So in particular, the site editor. A lot of feedback that we get is that navigating the editor and navigating particular block hierarchy can be quite challenging. And so this is a way to, in combination with zoomed out mode that we just showed, this is a way to try and alleviate that. So you can imagine if I am a site editor, if I get handed a site from an agency, for example, then maybe the default experience is that I can just select the top level blocks. I have whatever is editable in the right here, and I don't need to worry about the block hierarchy. I don't need to worry about selecting anything on canvas, and it can all be done through this much simpler experience. So if you're interested, I encourage you to check out that issue, provide feedback, because it is very interesting. It goes beyond this, beyond the synced patterns. So just quickly, if I edit the original pattern and I change the color, let's say the background color, and then go back. So the background color has changed, but the overrides have still been saved. And that's essentially synced patterns. And if I want to disable overrides, I can then just disable it. At this point, the connection will be lost. So there's a warning there before we disable. Any quick questions that we can get through, or wait to the end?
One question came in for this. Would you like to hear thoughts on pattern overrides, content locking, working with blocks that use repeatable inner blocks, list buttons, etc.? The link to a GitHub issue.
This is like a typical limitation of even like more comprehensive design tools like Figma that have had components for a long time, where in Figma, if you wanted to, let's say you have navigation with tabs, then the workaround is to add like 20 tabs. And then when you're using the instance, you would just delete all of the other tabs. I definitely see a feature where an override can be a repeatable block, like columns, for example, or grid is probably a better example, where you can, if you define the grid as overridable, then that is essentially saying its children are repeatable and you can add new children to it. Likewise, I may want a pattern that has an option to show a CTA or not, which is basically setting the like a button to visible or not. And that's essentially an override as well. So I see it going beyond just changing the attributes of blocks, and also just venturing into changing what's visible within the pattern. I think it opens up some really, really powerful experiences there. I'm going to move on because there's a few other things to show.
Yeah, definitely move on.
So next thing that I want to show is block connections. Again, this is a work in progress and this is very, very early, but 6.5 introduced block connections. So you can connect a block and you can view the attributes of basically the block shows whatever you're connected to. It was limited to a read-only experience, but for 6.6, we're going into a write experience as well, or an edit experience. So in this case, I've set up a post type called events, and events has a number of custom fields. Rather than modifying through like the traditional custom metabox approach, what I can do is I can set up a template in the site editor, and I can modify everything through in a much more visual way. So I can search for my event post types in here. And if I select one, you can see it's very much like a page, but the difference is that some of these fields are outside of the post content block. So if I go into my template here, which I've created a custom a template specifically for this post type, you can see I've got a couple of blocks here, and these blocks have been connected to these custom fields. So in this case, I have a custom field called location and venue, and I also have one called summary. The way that this is done, the way you connect blocks, is for 6.6 will continue to be just through code. So if we inspect the code, you can see, where is it? Yep. So you can see here the paragraph block. You can see it has some additional attributes here, which is, in this case, it's connected to post meta, and then the key is location. So that's the custom field that I'm connected to. And then the same for the follow-up paragraph. And so if I exit and go back into my event, and I can make any changes to this this value, and if I save it and refresh here, you can see it's been up, the custom field has been updated. So what's really interesting about this is that we're kind of creating this a more visual, if you consider this like a form field, it's just a more visual form, and I can fill out the blocks in, and I can present them however I want, and it's a close representation of what we'll show on the front end, which for some post types, maybe a more more traditional form will work, but for other post types, it makes for a really sort of interesting experience. And just to show how this works and some of the magic behind it, if I copy one of these blocks or multiple, and then go back and then make a change here, you can see the connection is synced across blocks. So in scenarios where you need blocks to be synced, you might need multiple ways of showing a piece of data. It'll all remain in sync, which is kind of cool. This also applies to the query loop block. So I've created a template, which I think I've maybe bugged out here. I'll just refresh. I've created a template called for my events. And so here you can see a query loop, which is querying, if we highlight it, you can see that it is basically it's querying through the event. I'm sure that's not showing there, but query because it's inherited. Yeah. So it's querying through the events post type. And then for each of these, I can actually do the same thing. So if I just quickly go back to, let's say, my 6.6 event and go into my template and then copy, let's say I'll just copy the entire row, and then go back to my event archive and replace this with my with the row that I've just copied. You can see it carries across the connections, and so now it's just been updated. And what's really cool about this is that it's kind of like almost like the data views concept, where I can actually make changes here. I'll do the same thing, and that's actually modifying the underlying data, which is super cool. So it's like almost like a bulk edit experience, which is really interesting. Not that anyone would do this, but just to showcase how it operates, it's kind of awesome. And then I'll move on to the last one, and we can go through questions because I know I'm covering a lot of ground here. The last thing I want to show is grid. So grid is again a work in progress, but something I'm really excited about. And there's two tracks of work when it comes to layout. There's the grid work, which we're working on, and then there's just improving how just this general layout experience here, where, for example, often there's a lot of confusion around, if I add just a group block around the inner blocks to use content with toggle, introducing like height and width controls, which there's a PR for. I'm just bringing Gutenberg and the editor more closer to like traditional design tools in the way that layout works, so it's a bit more familiar. That's the other track of work, but for today, I just want to showcase grid. What we're working on with grid is currently in grid, you have auto mode, which allows you to set the minimum column width. And so everything is where a block is placed depends on its position in the DOM. And you can't manually place items. But with this new manual experience, you can set a number of columns and you can set a number of rows. But you can also manually place grid items in the row. So I can drag to create grid items, and I can style them however I want. This is a bit unrealistic because I've just created a grid to showcase it. But once a grid is placed, you can reposition them, create new items. In this case, I'll just create one in the corner. And then I can reposition that as well. What we're working on in a separate branch is we have this concept currently of a pin. There's been some discussions about this. Basically, the pin is a way to say that I don't ever want this grid item to move. So you're essentially setting the start. If I go into the settings here, we have the column start and the row start position. So the pin is really just setting that. If I unpin this, you can see it then just goes back into the order of whatever the DOM is, but then I can rearrange it. And then if I drag it into a position that doesn't reflect the DOM or the ordering of the grid items, it goes back into a pin position. What we're working towards and experimenting with is just removing the idea of a pin, so that manual grid mode, which is what you see here, everything is essentially pinned, so that the positioning of grid items is all manual, so you can drag them around, create these really unique experiences. And in auto mode, if you want something which is a bit more structured, you would use auto mode in that case. So just to show, like, if I can do this without breaking things, if I paste a bunch of grid items in here, and so these are all unpinned, if I move one of these items to the right, because this is pinned, it essentially bypasses that, and that doesn't change. And so the pinning is flexible, but the trade-off is that it's a bit more complicated to understand. So we're trying to kind of find the right balance there. I think that's so we spin up a Slack channel in the core Slack group. It's called Feature Grid. If you want to join that, if you're interested in contributing or providing feedback, you're welcome to join there. And that's where most of the like the back and forth discussions will happen. And I think that's it.
We have a couple quick questions, which thank you, Saxon. Round of applause for Saxon and Rich. Or as you know, like to do on Zoom. I wanted to cover some of these quick ones on grid. Brian asked if we can overlap items. My understanding is not yet. Do you have more to add?
So you can. We've put a limit in place right now where you can't override items. But if I go back and if I pin an item, this branch is a little janky just because it's new. But so if I pin this and do it, it does allow you to do it just through the nature of just the fact that it just sets. So you can manually set the start. Well, you can manually set the start position of both the column and row. So you can create overlapping grid items. We just, for V1, I think we'll just limit how you can do that. So for example, you can't drag into these cells. if it overlaps right now. But that's for sure the end goal, because that's just one of the benefits of grid, is that you can create these unique layout experiences that you can't necessarily do with like row.
Sweet. It's a great answer. Mike asked, are there any thoughts on how some of these more unique grid layouts will work on mobile? So for example, columns, auto stacking, so that provides some mobile friendly layout.
Yeah, so there are a couple of challenges with this work. Responsiveness is one, and that's almost like a separate, it could be considered a separate project, which there are various discussions floating around how to best do that, like container queries, for example. But what we can do is provide, be smart initially about how we stack items. So whether it's an option just like where you can stack on mobile for columns, or if it's just automatic, what we can do is if you resize your viewport, at some point it'll stack, and at some point, because all of these are manually positioned, it doesn't natively do that. Whereas if you're using the auto mode, it does, because you're setting a minimum width, and you can set, there's a PR to introduce a maximum width, maximum column count as well. So on that point, it's like intrinsic in that it just naturally scales down. For manual mode, it's more complicated because of that, we're just manually placing everything. So we can be smart and try and like look at the positions and calculate at what point we should stack and how we should stack it. But it also just ties into that separate discussion around the general need for some more responsive controls, like container queries, for example. The other challenge is that in this case, I have a 12 column grid, and I have a grid item that spans 6 columns. If I change that 12 column grid to, let's say, 4 columns, what happens? And it's a similar sort of challenges to responsive, in that we need to either reduce the width of the grid item, allow it to overlap, push it down the rows. Like there's various things that we need to figure out, and they can all be calculated. It's just how, like, what is the best default experience for people.
Yeah, I dig it. These are good. All overlapping problems at a certain degree. It's a great question. I'm going to go through some of the previous ones. Zooming back up. Saxon, the preview of the product custom fields is a screen you see before the editor. How does that design relate to the modal for legacy meta boxes that is also happening? And Rich chimed in there, but I did want to follow up on that because I know that is coming up a fair amount. And
Meta boxes.
Rich, yeah, let me drop the PR that we're talking about here. Ella's been working on this. Let me scroll back up to where this was. Rich chimed in and said, ideally, any data values associated with the post type should be actionable within data views, including generating fields for data. But the meta boxes is basically like having two different, there's a toggle right now. So moving legacy boxes behind the toggle that you can hide and show. And I think it's just questions around how the design relates with data views to that. Brian, if I totally got that wrong, let me know.
Yeah, so the data views, we're looking at the ability to quick edit. There are a few different approaches, like selecting multiple and then using essentially the inspector here as a way to modify attributes. There's also more of like the Notion or Airtable type experience where you can just select a cell, then change it within the data view. So that's related but separate, and there just needs to be, in regards to this concept where you do have post types do have essentially what I would call a detail view. There needs to be just a broader discussion around how do we define what goes in this view versus what goes in like the inspector, which is where we have some recent PRs just introduced, rather than in the bottom, which is where they naturally are in the inspector. So there just needs to be some discussions around how we handle that. Because there are benefits, especially for more complicated things that require more space. Like product is a great example, where there's just so much involved in creating and editing a product that it just wouldn't, doing that within the inspector just wouldn't be an ideal experience. So we really need to still have this middle step, which is what we currently have in WP Admin and in various scenarios. It's just really up to the consumer or the plugin or whatever to define what the best experience might be.
Sweet. I do want to call it, just related to that, overall conversation, there is a developer hours coming up for alternatives to custom meta boxes in the block editor on May 14th. And I'm just going to drop that in really lazily, that I think is worth joining in on. I also, it's something that I've been chatting with both the folks running this around, getting feedback from folks, what resources need to be shared on the developer blog, where are we missing things. One of the things that's come out of it is that some of the components that folks are using or that want to use are experimental, they're marked as experimental. So there's actually work underway over the last week to move those out of experimental and help solidify some things. So feedback is very much welcome and desired, so we can get kind of all that work in a better spot. So just wanted to call that out. Let's see, that covers that question. Let's pop on up, since I skipped it to begin with. Brian, we're gonna really throw it back. Brian Gardner asked, how do we feel about the fact that the fonts API, I'm guessing, existed while also encouraging theme builders to ship fonts so that variations, typography, are available in global styles? Rich chimed in and said we could potentially reconcile these, so declaring a font family in theme JSON could potentially bring it into the site editor, maybe tricky. Oh, does anyone have? Yeah, Brian,
let me qualify let me give some my context. Rich is intimately aware of all of my exploration and trying to figure out how to do the best everything. So now that the font API exists, you've got themes that ship 50 fonts with it, right? All these different variations, and these downloads are 10 meg because it's oh, I wanted to ship 8 fonts. It's how do we reconcile the ability in the case of, I think, the style variations, the typography stuff, with saying we want to opinionate by shipping some? Is that necessary because it's so easy now to connect with the font API? I'm philosophically just sort of trying to figure that out. Do you put them in their own theme variations? Do you ship a bunch of, because one can make the argument a theme should ship with no fonts, right? Because they're so easy to connect now. You want outfit, go get outfit. You want fig tree, go get fig tree. And so I see just people unnecessarily, really, a lot of these themes are huge because they just bundle a bunch of fonts. So just more of a philosophical question than a technical question.
Yeah, I remember this coming up with patterns, where folks were just shoving tons of patterns into things for a while too. And having, it's 5 themes in one, or 10 themes in one, 20 themes in one. Where does it end? Where do we draw the line? I definitely think there is both space for, I would not say themes should never ship some, unless that's an opinionated approach you're taking. But I think there is a matter of, for onboarding onto a theme, making it easy for folks to have a certain set of fonts that might look good with what's there and what the default setup is, especially when it comes to patterns and how things might look. So I'm all about theme authors providing that, and then also allowing folks to customize further. And I think part of this, which will get interesting, which is a big question mark in my mind, is when it comes to block theme switching and the interoperability of all of this. Imagine you have a theme, you want to keep the typography and the style variations and bring it over to another theme. Okay, now you have double the, then what if you switch things again and now you have a bunch? At what point do we just create a directory of these things? We're not at that point yet, in my opinion. But yeah, Rich, I'm curious if you have any thoughts, or Saxon. This is open discussion, so if folks want to just chime in too, now that the demos are done. I don't want folks unnecessarily being silent.
Yeah, I think it could be tricky to implement, but I think with trying to connect fonts to sites and whatnot, when you're activating a preset of a variable, of a typography variable, but I think it's possible and worth something exploring, so that if a theme declares a font family, perhaps, that is available within the font library, there's some way to connect it and meet that expectation that it is there, especially like you mentioned, when you do switch themes. Because if you switch themes and you have a different theme, but you've assigned a specific font, we're coupling it back, the idea of styles and theme. Whereas, moving forward, we're almost, we're decoupling the idea of colors and typography from a specific theme. And the font library helps in that too. I think there's definitely worth some explorations on that front for sure.
Yeah, agreed. Grant.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think it's also important to keep in mind that environments may vary. So WordPress now ships with the Google Fonts collection by default, but that may or may not be available in the particular WordPress environment that the user has. So I think themes having good defaults is still really important.
Yeah, agreed. Also, Mike McAllister said in the chat, be opinionated in how you want the theme to display by default. Give it some character with an include font, and then the user doesn't have to go hunting. Which I agree with. We do, you know, right now the font library is not the most visible thing in the world by design. We also don't want folks, you know, all of a sudden installing 50, 60 fonts on their own. So I think having things out of the box makes a lot of sense. I'm going to jump back to other questions. One of the questions that came up, I'm pretty sure around the section stylings, pattern styles, colorways, whatever we're going to end up calling it. Are there any naming conventions needed for the consistency of colors, which I'm pretty sure touches on a larger topic that from years ago, I was about to dig up the GitHub issue, but Rich, I don't know if you wanted to chime in there. I'll try and find the GitHub issue while we're.
Yeah, I think the tricky part is there's always going to be some sort, or probably always going to be some sort of naming convention issue. You know, and what this effort does is it reduces the amount of issues, because today, like I said, you can only have base and contrast, or whatever the body and the text colors is assigned, as guaranteed contrasting colors. All the other combinations of colors can't be guaranteed at all. So what this effort does is it makes it to where, okay, now instead of worrying about all the different slugs around all the different colors, we're just mapping these style variations. Now, if themes have more style variations than others, like I think it's totally fine. Core might have like it's like, okay, the next theme, the next core default theme might have, you know, 4 that becomes like, okay, this is the, you know, the standard, like in a sense, but the colors that are assigned to each one of those doesn't matter. It's just whether or not your theme wants to have the same ones, so that if you switch to your theme, the light version in your theme gets applied wherever the light version was already applied. But your theme still decides what all those color values are. So I think there were some ideas around trying to remove that concept, or like relying on something that's more standardized, like spacing presets. You know, for example, use numeral values to indicate differences. But I don't think that something will land. Probably, I don't know if anything should land. I think that, you know, being able to have that flexibility for themes is important too. And so it is a healthy balance. But I do think we're alleviating a lot of that that complications like do come when you do transition from theme to theme, or applying different colors on patterns between themes as well.
Yeah, I easily found like 5 issues in the space that you're talking, but I shared a couple and I'll link to it in the chat because it's come up a lot. I wanted to repeat what Mike said. It's tough because for themes like Ollie, I based those naming conventions on the core theme at the time, but now it's changed to something else. I can't just change that in Ollie because it would break styles for all the current users. This is part of the tricky point.
Yeah, the difference is though, like when Ollie can provide these different style variations, you know, for light, dark, or, you know, darker, or whatever the combination of colors is, and it decides what those colors are. So the slugs don't even matter anymore. Like at this point, like once you add these variations, it's just kind of one level up higher. And then like even 2024, we can go back and update it with color variations, so that the theme does get these as well, and it doesn't matter what those individual color slugs are anymore.
Yeah, this is putting great emphasis on element styling, which kind of reduces the reliance on color, on naming conventions.
Yeah.
But you could even use like hex color values if you wanted to hack away at this. Like it doesn't have to even be a variable. Like it could be anything you want, and that class is what defines what all those colors are. I don't recommend doing that though.
Good caveat. Scrolling down. One of the questions that was, I'm just gonna surface some of them that were already answered, but I wanted to just surface them in the conversation. So what field types, text select relationship is this expected to support when introduced? And this is related to custom fields and block binding. For 6.5, I will drop in a list, but paragraph supports content, heading supports content, image has URL, alt, and title, button, text, URL, link target, and rel. So like there are different things that can be put together right now, but it is limited. And I don't I was trying to look through and see if it's slated to expand it to more blocks in 6.6, and I can't see anything on the tracking issue or iteration issue for that. But I think in the future it is slated to expand it as it makes sense and as we can do so. But for now, that's the current list from 6.5 for supporting bindings and custom fields. We covered that one. I think we covered the rest of them in the chat. Let me just make sure, do one last. Yeah, we rocked it. All right, now we get to have 20 minutes of pure chaos. Is there anything on anyone's mind? There's a ton of stuff we could have covered in this demo too, and like I feel like I went back and forth a bunch around what to show. Colin says, as Rich was demoing the theme JSON of the variations and how transportable it is, I wonder how far away we are from theme JSON only themes. Yeah, I think we're pretty pretty close, especially if you pull in from the pattern directory. And we can create pretty easy experiences there. Like I definitely was almost helping a family friend create a really simple site, and I was about to just honestly use the create block theme plugin and just create a thing and have them be like, okay, what patterns do you like from the pattern directory? Here you go, goodbye, and lock it down. So
yeah, I think
So
there's
it also begins to change or redefine what a theme actually is. Like if you think about the modularity that we now have with the typography and colors and patterns, it just becomes a big collection of components that you throw together in different ways. So it's more of a library than a theme.
Yeah, exactly. I think the theme is like I think Mike put it well. Like it's there's something about being opinionated, like having the templates, having all the pieces put together in a fashion that's easy to get a particular type of site going quickly. But I do think it's important too that you could be able to use templates from other themes or patterns. Patterns we already can, but now colors and typography. So themes become that composition unit, not just something that's so locked down into one particular look or feel.
sweet. I want to give a couple minutes. We can always end early. This was an experiment, so I always feel like about an hour 15 is when everyone's brain starts to melt. And we're right on track for that. I did want to call out the WordPress 6.6 is set to be released on July 16th, and it's a bit of a shorter cycle. I'm trying to work on the roadmap. I think Rich and we both are on the squad this time around. And so trying to pull together a roadmap from all this fun stuff. And so stay tuned for that. Mike, I'd love to hear if anyone has a fix for this issue I'm dealing with regarding caching and style variations. Oh, interesting. Long story short, the style variations cache isn't clear, so you have to switch back and forth between variations to clear while working on a new theme. This sounds...
I think you can can't you set like WP dev mode, development mode into as theme or something? And I think it busts the cache for you.
Yeah, it looks like that's part of the issue. Yeah, that works for theme JSON, but not for the variations. Interesting.
Oh, right. Yeah, variations you do have to switch.
This sounds like a good create block theme. I'm like,
I don't know. That's a tricky one. It's kind of annoying, but yeah, that's the way it is. One hack I've done is just put the variation as either have a bash script that combines the two and just have it as at the top level, or just have the variation itself as at the top level and just style appropriately, and then put it back in the directory. It's not ideal though, but yeah, that's kind of frustrating.
I'm sorry, I don't think there's a way around that right now, which is an answer, unfortunately.
Yeah, I bet create block theme could I don't know. We can.
I know. I was like, I don't know
yeah,
if it would.
Tricky.
All right, well, it seems like we've hit the max. Riyadh mentions bringing it up in a track ticket. I like that idea. And drop it into the outreach channel. I think that would be a good thing to see if other folks are running into it, because I always love seeing how many folks are pissed off about something. It always helps to kind of gather more thoughts and get different edge cases, and then who knows who has a solution for it or workaround, as Rich shared. But yeah, let's wrap up. I will recap this on Make Core, and would love to hear in like the comments or whatever if you DM me and Zazu, just to see if this kind of format was helpful. Kind of looking ahead across releases and seeing like big pieces of work, and big props to Saxon and Rich for the beautiful demos, and props to you all for showing up and chiming in. If you're watching the recording, definitely leave comments on the post, chime in on the issues, follow us up there.
I maybe
Oh.
still have a question. Sorry
yeah.
to interrupt.
Please.
If we still have time.
Yeah, we still have time.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No.
So this is like, it was amazing, and I'm just kind of noticing it's all like super technical, and there's so much still like coming out, and we need to keep like on track with all of that. And I just over the last days reached out on Twitter X, kind of asking like, why do people think that block theme adoption and block-based WordPress is still kind of like not taking off as like it could be, and like why do people struggle? Why is it not like so popular still to use block themes? And I just still got the same feedback. I feel for over the last years that the general feedback was still like, oh, it's confusing. I think there's like a knowledge gap was one of the terms people said, and I think it's just for like small agencies or freelancers trying to switch to block theme. It's still like a huge undertaking to keep up with all the new things coming and still kind of serve your customers, and at the same time build like these new things and kind of still maybe having to iterate and stuff. So I wonder if maybe we need, next to all the technical documentation, and I know there's been like tons of work done, but I think even for myself, it's still confusing. Like, where do I get like all the news? Like, what do I have to follow? Like, it is a lot to keep up with, and I'm still struggling. Right, where do I find the information? So I wonder if we maybe need something like super simple, like the WordPress org YouTube channel, something like that, with like just regular snippets or shorts to have like the easiest way for people to consume and keep up with the updates without it being too technical. I wonder, like, I think there's still opportunities missed by the community to do that, like just get something fast and simple out to the people they can consume easily without needing to read and like find places where they read or GitHub issues and all that. I think there's still some things we could do to make it easier to follow.
Yeah, we need all levels of content, without a doubt. And I think we have some in more places than others. Like there's the developer blog that I think does a great job of sharing resources. But again, that is on the more technical side, obviously, for the developer blog. And so I do think we have a gap there. I am trying to do more like product focused, kind of end user style posts on like the WordPress org news, even to get information out there. I think a lot of the release style content that we see, like the little, we call them featurettes, also help kind of with that messaging. And so there's Saxon started the microsite trend where each release there's like a beautiful microsite that you can go and look at. Like I think we're getting there. We're getting pieces and getting ideas out, and I would be curious. I love talking to different YouTubers because it's fascinating to hear what folks gravitate towards and what gets the most views and all that sort of stuff, and what they see as gaps or people want to hear about. So I agree with you. I just +1, and I think folks are working on it. I think I'm curious if the Media Core group, like Mike just said, the new marketing initiatives can help with this. Like I can tell you from my point of view, like the source of truth is intended to help people who are actually amplifiers and content creators to do this. I think a lot of it should come from, in an ideal world, we have a really robust YouTube channel with little shorts all the time, but we're not in the ideal world yet. But yeah, I would love to see that. I know I've been trying to get inspired from Rich's Screen Studio demos and seeing if I can play around on my YouTube channel so that I can then maybe bring those to WordPress.org and have some of those shorter style featurettes that we're not necessarily using up designer time on. Because that's the tricky part, is to make it look good. It seems really easy, but to make it look good is really hard.
It is hard work, that's true.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, it's really hard. Yeah. So
And I mean,
I
it's not one person who can do it all. I think maybe
yeah.
there should be. I'm not aware of like the new marketing initiatives, but I think there should be a team of like creators, and on like an easy to find channel like like WordPress.org. I think still lots of room. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I
I
Thanks
agree.
for the
thoughts to
link.
share. There are a few thoughts to share on this topic. One is, I think the education is important, both in terms of how we educate people on how to use the editor, but also just like you mentioned, making sure that changes that we for each release are really visible, which the microsites do, but we can do much more on the website as well. Like we should be linking off to, we should have a very specific page on the editor and its functionality and how it can help you design and write and publish, which we don't do a great job of on the website. The second thing is just around familiarity. So touched on this with the layout work, where someone's, if one of our strategies is to attract more designers to WordPress, which I think is very important, we want them to feel like whatever they're using layout as an example, that it's familiar to them. And right now, the current layout experience in Gutenberg can be very confusing for people who are moving over from Figma, for example, which is where designers spend a lot of their time. And that applies to other things like even box shadow, for example, fonts, typography. So closing the gap there is important. And then the last one is that, WordPress, the editor is kind of in this position where we need to cater to both advanced, like professional users and non-technical users. It's not like, for example, Webflow. If you dropped a non-technical person into Webflow, they're going to face the same challenges because it's very much a professional tool. It has, it's basically mapped to CSS, like a CSS visual editor, essentially. So we have to kind of handle both ends of the spectrum. And that's kind of where some of the work around zoomed out mode and the content only editing experience comes in, where we have the granular level, like the editing, where you can control, you can nest things and you have full control over the layout and the structure. But for non-technical users, plugins and platforms and agencies can really lean into that as like a simpler layer on top. For people who don't necessarily need to change layout and can really lean heavily into patterns, into style variations, and don't need to navigate like clicking down 3 levels or going back up 3 levels, which people really struggle with. The navigation block is an example of that, where often they'll select like a navigation item, but then want to go back up to the navigation to change it. It's just, they get lost. And so I think we're kind of in this unique position where we need to cater to both, which I think is possible. It's just a lot more challenging than, say, if we were just catering to a very specific like audience, like developers, for example. And so we now have the bottom layer, which is granular, and then the top layer, which is a simpler experience on top.
Yeah, I'm really excited for some of the upcoming work on that, with like advancing the content only editing and a lot of stuff with patterns and zoom up. Like everything you touched on, I do think, just from my experience during the outreach program, like I do think that will be a big step in the right direction around some of the confusion. I still think patterns are hard for people to discover and use. Like I personally run into that. Like I run many different sites and I still will catch myself being like, oh yeah, I could just go get a pattern for this rather than fiddling with stuff. So I always find that interesting. I think that's getting better. But I think a lot of this larger work will make it easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question though, and great topic. Like it's something I think it'll be a forever problem, which are sometimes the most fun problems to dig into. Sweet. Got 8 more minutes or we can wrap. Let's wrap up. I think this was awesome. I really appreciate everyone joining, and we'll do them in different time zone, as Rich said earlier. It's hard to accommodate everyone. I know I got a lot of pings from people being like, that's too late for me. So I appreciate everyone who stayed up and who joined and who got up early, all that good stuff. And look forward to more of these where we can kind of talk this stuff through. So, and feedback is welcome for iterating on this as well. So please also share feedback. And with that, I'll bid you all adieu. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you all in Slack. Bye.